This video help, we're going to be covering the billing tab in the customer screen. So let's go ahead and stop and click on that. The billing tab actually has two aspects to this. You can do an invoice for products that are sold at a price. That may not make sense until you understand that there's also a work order where there is no pricing in it. The way that this custom app was designed, it has a work order where work tasks for services will be performed, and you can go to the work order and do the functions there. But if your type of business also includes a receipt invoice where you're going to be charging for either services or equipment, you would use this input area to add an invoice to the system. And what it does, it also allows you to set your own invoice numbers in sequence based on the client. In this case, you can see where I put VC for VC in the customer's name and then the first sequential invoice. Now, what this does is it allows you to group or change an invoice based on it being a quote or not a quote. And you can, for example, put a VCQ in for a quote. And then later on, if it's going to be an actual sale, you can make it a sale invoice by taking out the quote. In addition, I'm going to jump across just to show you that there are different condition notes as well, where you can put in quote and different kind of payment issues as far as how this invoice would be paid. And as with the prior screens, you have a note. In this case, it has an underline on it, which means there's another screen where you can edit these drop-down lists. The reason that is done is that on some devices that you'll get a scroller and you will not be able to edit within the scroller. Well, this will allow you to edit whatever you want to add to the scroller by going to the specific notes list and changing the list. Now, I recommend that you do not change the list where you take anything away that's been used in another screen, because if you take it away, it'll simply erase it in that field and you won't have the usage of it anymore. Plus, where you have used it, it will be disappearing on you. Now, in the case of this invoice, when you use it, you will always put in a date for the invoice. This will show the invoice date on the invoice. The way you do that is just to use the drop down and pick the current date that you're going to be invoicing the client. The next thing you would do is you would pick the product from the inventory system, which, like I said prior, these are only sample records. You would click that, then the equipment name would come across. You would go ahead and put in the each cost based on the standard price. This should be the cost of the price, cost of the item that you're going to be charging. In most cases, you will see a value that is in the standard price from the inventory system that tells you that's the minimum you should be charged for, because it is the cost. You should be doing a markup on it as far as this is concerned. The next thing you would do is add a quantity for this times the actual cost that you're going to be selling it at. And it will automatically calculate the value for the subtotal. You would use this drop down to add a percentage for the tax rate. And again, this has a tax table list that you can edit to set up whatever tax you want, and then use the drop down. Or if you're not going to use a tax where you don't charge tax, just leave this field blank. The tax will be calculated if you add it. You can see on the top, we did not have a tax. We didn't even have a total, so I'm just showing you the difference of what it looks like. So this is a complete record, and this is a partial. Anytime you do a partial record and you don't complete it, and you click out of the fields out of here, it will put that at the top to flag it as an undone tax situation where you need to go ahead and put it in there. Or you can go into the portal record row and click on it and take that particular line item out if that was something you did not want to put in there. You will see a delete button in the portal to delete that row. This button will take you to that specific row's record. You can also do searches in the portal on the individual portal record where you cannot do them in the portal itself. So the start find will not work in a portal. It will work on the records information up here. As before, on the prior screen, there is a billing list review, which shows the items that are in the billing list for this particular invoice that you're setting up. Now I'm going to explain The reason for the dates in here is that you can have multiple invoice inputs for items that are in this list, and they will be sorted by date. And when you go to the actual invoice where you're going to print the invoice, you do a check to make sure that you have the correct invoice number installed and the date. And then what it'll eliminate all the other records that are in here except for the number that you're picking and the date range or date for the invoice that you're actually running. So this is actually a report type of invoice. It gives you the ability to do an unlimited number of items on one list, and you can pick and choose. Say, for example, you have 3 invoices that are going out that were jobs that were services that were done. You can group those by a date range, and the date range will allow you to put all 3 invoices on one invoice and print all the sheets required to accommodate those invoice items. So there's a lot of flexibility in the way that the invoice works. There is a billing report that will be covered later that shows you how the items were billed out and by whom they were billed to. And then a billing invoice is the actual invoice, which we'll cover later in a different video. So you can see how the invoice is actually used. Up at the top of the screen, as you add data here, it's going to calculate the sum of the tax first, the subtotal, and then the total. The subtotal being whatever is charged plus tax is the total for the invoice. And if you have not taken a payment, there is a total sum in here for the balance due. There is a payment portal, which we'll be covering next, which will show you how you bill out the invoice and take payments for it. You do not add new records for these tabs, just to be clear on that. When you do a transaction or you add information in here for the invoice, you do not have to create a new record. All the invoice data is actually tied back to the client for this record, who has the name in the record here. And this is a history of all the items that were ordered for this client by the date, by the newest date first, and then they'll push them down until you have only the balance stuff completed here. Obviously, if you have a 0 balance up here, all the invoice data that is here is now paid for. If you have a sum paid, yet you have a balance on it, you can go to the payment screen to see what was actually paid and not paid. And you can also use notes to show how it was paid. It was paid on delivery, paid on return, it was invoiced, a deposit was taken, the customer returned it or the customer picked it up. It was a consumable item that was not a cost. So for example, up on this note, I might want to put a consumable item that was not a charge item, and the client carried it out. So you have a number of different options by the line item, and you can show quote items individually by each invoice item if you're going to use it as a quote, and you can actually print a quote invoice. So you can then turn it into a full invoice by taking out the Q in front of this and then turning it into an actual invoice. You can also use the built-in omit record line items in the invoice, where you can take out any one line item for any one invoice if there's multiple items that, say, for example, it's a quote item and you're not actually going to be billing it, but you want to bill the balance of the stuff. You could go ahead and run an invoice minus that one line item. So there's a lot of flexibility, as I said, in this particular input system and for the invoice itself. Let's just take a quick peek at the invoice before we leave, but we're not going to talk too much about it, so you can get an idea of what the invoice is going to look like. The invoice in this case is for this company, and it also has the information that came over from the record for that person. If you don't see the correct person, you can click on the drop down to bring up the person's name in the records. In this case, when I clicked on my name, it brought it up. And then you go ahead and you'll see that it'll change to show the information for that client. It'll show you the billed balance. Now, what you can also do too is you can do a find if you're looking for a specific invoice element or invoice range. You create it starting by doing a date range. I'm not going to go much further than that, but you can come back here and take the video for this screen and complete the transaction. To go back to the customer screen, click on this icon, and you'll be back into the billing area. If you have any questions, as always, go ahead and contact me through the support icon. It'll take you to the support site where you can actually ask for help. Thank you.